Rick, thanks for joining us again. Welcome back, everybody, to the second installment conversation with Rick Berman, who has been described as a weapon of mass destruction for the restaurant industry by 60 Minutes. You know, our last episode, we talked about Rick, your past, how you got into the advocacy and lobbying game, and sort of your unique, knife in the teeth approach to advocacy and opinion molding. And you were, the gloves off approach was certainly unique. Back in the day, it's certainly mainstream now, but you used a lot of humor in your ads. I mean, as I was looking back at some of your videos that you used in some of these campaigns, there was a lot of humor in it. So it was aggressive, it was edgy, but it was kind of funny. No, it was actually some of them were really funny. Tell me about the thinking behind that. That was also sort of cutting edge at the time.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I always understand is that I wasn't just out there with a message. I was out there with a message that people would identify with. And again, I wasn't trying to get the people on the far left, if I can use that category, to agree with me. I was just trying to neutralize those people and, most importantly, convince the people who were in the middle that we had a point of view that was worth listening to. And the one way you do that sometimes is with animals, sometimes it's with kids. If you want to have a good TikTok video, you need one of those two groups. But what I always thought was that the humor aspect, as I said in our first video, was something that would allow me to get into the fact that people were duplicitous, were hypocrites, were just not playing with the facts as the facts would suggest. And so, you mentioned 60 Minutes. Well, there's a clip on 60 Minutes about my position on obesity. You remember the obesity epidemic was really crazy. And there were people who were saying that there should be warnings on desserts that that is how we got the calorie counts on menus. But they wanted there to be warnings on packages of food that you would buy in the grocery store as to which ones you shouldn't buy, or why that you shouldn't buy them, not healthy for your family, etc. And so the obesity thing was a big deal. You remember even Mayor Bloomberg decided that, a big soda, a big gulp, that 7-Eleven should be banned. And we did a full page ad in the New York Times. It was pretty funny. And anyway, he backed off of that. I don't think I was welcome at Gracie Mansion in New York after that. But nonetheless, there was a real backlash after a while about obesity. And at the end of the day, I think people decided that wasn't the issue that they wanted to spend all their time on. And so that's a perfect example. I mentioned changing the debate is what I was always about. And if you're going to change the debate, that means you're not going to participate in the debate that's presently going on. That's that he said, she said debate. I said, no, I'm not going to argue with them about what they think the issue is. Let's reposition, let's reframe the issue, and let them argue against what we're saying. You could say that's hardball, but it's factual.
Speaking of humor, I think most of your videos and your campaigns were peppered with humor. I think that kind of I don't know what you called it, but the Thanks Union Boss campaign, where you talk about, the union dues and the downside of, being in a union. Those were effective. And, I think, I don't know if there was ever a time when, the hospitality industry, certainly hotels are different, but like restaurants were really ever heavily unionized. And maybe it's just a function of, the industry, the high turnover, small restaurants have not a lot of not a lot of employees that, through union dues can support, or justify the expense of an organizing effort. But, labor has been, a 3-year career, an adversary from the very beginning, till when you know, sold Berman and Company, right? But I think they still are. What were some of the more effective, campaigns against unions?
Firstly, going back to, my history is that my first job, actually my early years as a lawyer was as a management labor lawyer. And so not only was I comfortable in that area, but I had an appetite for it. And, the guy who ran the restaurant union when I first joined Steak and Ale was a guy by the name of Ed Hanley. And Ed Hanley was mobbed up. When I say mobbed up, I mean there was a commission, the presidential commission on organized labor, and the 4 unions that they had figured were mafia controlled or mafia influenced were the Teamsters, the Longshoremen, the Laborers Union, and the Restaurant Employees and Bartender Union. And Ed Hanley, I think it was in the early 70s that Ed Hanley became the president of the Restaurant Workers Union, and he decided that he was going to get this membership back up. It had gone down quite a bit. Again, turnover in the restaurant industry would dictate that. And so he started some aggressive campaigns. And if you're Hanley and you want to go after restaurants, you're not going to go after fast food. There's too much turnover there, and the employees don't want to pay union dues. So you're going to go after table service. If you're going to go after table service, you're not going to go for independent operators because that's a one-off. Now you're into your last universe of possibilities, and that's chains. And what's one of the biggest chains at the time in the 70s? Steak and Ale. But I always felt that if Steak and Ale went under in that regard, if they started to unionize some Steak and Ale restaurants, well, then it was going to unionize the Fridays right down the street and so on. So there was going to be a ripple effect pretty quickly. That was easy to see because Hanley was putting some serious money behind these efforts from the union. And the union, like Steak and Ale in Northern Virginia and Maryland, but mostly Northern Virginia, there's a lot of Steak and Ales in the suburbs, and the union was smart. They had some of their inside employees working in multiple units so that they could infect other people with this idea of getting a union in there. And I told Norman, this is the fight of your life, and we beat them. I will say that with some unconventional tactics, I will say as well. I mean, I don't want to talk about them today. Some people would say, yeah, that's not legal. And so I don't want to get into that debate. But nonetheless, we did beat them. And so the big campaigns with the labor unions were card check. I mean, that's what they always were looking for. And, as I said in our last video, the one thing that I did was film, that script with George McGovern in our office. We filmed it in our office, and George read it off the teleprompter, read the script off the teleprompter. He did it 100% proper first time. And so, as soon as that was done, I said, we are going to beat card check. That was the thing that was going to kill it. But we had some great videos on union organizing, and we had a really funny one with kids in a classroom.
What if labor bosses control class elections?
Thanks for your vote. I want to assure you that a vote for me is best for you. Miss Hudgens has just agreed that there isn't going to be any secret vote. Sign these cards showing us who you like the best, and my campaign committee will collect and count them.
Today, thousands of workers are being forced into unions without a secret ballot vote. Reason number 5 for the Employee Rights Act.
You sure about this?
Yeah, but you, just like, McGovern, where, that was, an unlikely friendship you had with him. You also, even though you would go to war with labor unions, you had some good friends that were with some of the big labor unions, right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the guy the guy who named me Dr. Evil, it was in a USA Today article, and they quoted him as saying, well, I call him Dr. Evil, and then 60 Minutes picked that up, and they made that part of their 60 Minutes feature on when I agreed to do the spot. They decided to use the Dr. Evil thing. But that guy, Richard Bensinger is his name. He's still around. He's a consultant he's probably the biggest consultant to labor unions. He's the guy that started the whole Starbucks campaign. Richard and I were frenemies, if you will. We're friends and enemies at the same time. We would, have dinner together, play golf together, but we never would compromise each other. I didn't tell him anything I wouldn't want him to know, and vice versa. But yes, you can have friends like that. Dick Camber was a friend of mine. He was the biggest PR firm for labor unions, and Vic and I were good friends. Because, when it's kind of like Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill. Some of these guys have no problem getting along with each other, even though they're fighting on a daily basis over philosophical issues.
What was that campaign where it was the Girl Scout cookie? Was that the obesity campaign?
Yes, that was the obesity campaign.
So you sold my client these chocolate chips, and look, no warning label, just pretty pictures. Just look what this reckless cookie-baking business has done to my client. Your Honor, obviously she's guilty and needs to pay me, my client, damages. You make them taste good on purpose, don't you?
I guess so.
Learn more about lawyers cashing in on obesity at consumerfreedom.com.
Well, also we had one where I used the soup Nazi from Seinfeld.
That's right.
Where he was weighing people as they went into the restaurant. The whole thing about that commercial was it was the soup Nazi, right? I had a campaign on high fructose corn syrup, in defending high fructose corn syrup, and we had a video with Dr. Ruth. You remember Dr. Ruth?
Dr. Ruth Westheimer?
The sex therapist. Yeah, we had a good cameo with her. More than a cameo, she was the commercial.
What was that campaign? Was that the obesity?
Well, yes, in a way, because people who were, wanting to do something about obesity decided that high fructose corn syrup was much worse for you than cane sugar or beet sugar. And so there was an attack on high fructose corn syrup.
You were, like we talked about in our earlier conversation, sort of a pioneer in the, aggressive, taking of prisoners, messaging, and used humor effectively.
I was always going to be taking a position where there was logic, science, or some evidence, maybe math. You may remember the big Card Kruger fight where they had come out. I mean, here's Card Kruger, top economists from Princeton and Harvard, coming out and saying that raising the minimum wage actually increases employment. Forget about decreases. And that was untracking everything that we had ever said. And, economists forever had been saying it. And the Clinton administration got all over that. I can't tell you how many people were quoting that study, and Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of Labor, all these people were making a big deal about it. And what, I was sitting around for a long time and I was saying, there's got to be a hole in this thing. There's got to be some, but I'm going up against guys with big resumes, and I got a young staffer on my team, and I said, see if you can find out how they got these numbers. I mean, they came up with these numbers of all these businesses that had actually increased employment after they had to raise the minimum wage. And they had a control group. They were comparing Pennsylvania to New Jersey, the border of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and they looked at all these fast food restaurants in New Jersey, which raised the rate. Pennsylvania did not. And so that's how they made these comparisons. And anyway, we got the survey instruments, and then I found the hole. Then I found the hole in it. And when I did, I was so relieved. And we put out a very nasty, now you want to talk about nasty, we put out a very nasty report on card Kruger. And it was bulletproof. And we were the lead witness before the Joint Economic Committee describing what we had found about that report. And then we got a couple of other economists to validate what we had said and done. And, you want to talk about smash mouth, that was pretty hardball.
I don't know if that was the beginning when you had to sort of peel back the onion and expose, the academic work of that study. But you had a lot of talented still. I mean, BuzzFeed called, Berman and Company a legendary Washington public affairs firm. And you assembled a lot of very smart sort of academic types to, make sure that the work you were doing was bulletproof. And was that the beginning of your use of academia and academics and economists in a lot of your work?
I don't like to tell people who supported what I was doing because I always promised people anonymity. But I mean, you can imagine that the one name that I don't hide because everybody knows is Norman Brinker. And I went to Norman at one point. He was very upset over the fact that, the unions were making all the claims about minimum wage as an example, just as an example in this case, because there's other labor issues out there. Mandated health insurance was, a huge one. Norman said, what are we doing wrong? The facts should be on our side. These people are making all sorts of money, and now you're saying got to raise the minimum wage. What he was talking about is tipped employees. And I said, the big problem is you don't have any good research. We don't have any good research. And I said, every time we need research, we have to get it at the last minute. Some congressman says, well, if you have any research that supports your position? And we'd say no. And they'd say, but then we'd scramble. We'd hire some economics firm. These are the people who say, tell me what number you want. They'll come up with a report that says that. And everybody kind of knows that it's not really, doesn't really have any gravitas to it. So I convinced Norman that what we needed to do was to get academics from good universities to study some of our issues and to basically agree with us if the facts were as we say. And that was the start of the Employment Policies Institute. And Norman liked the idea, and he convened the meeting, actually 2 meetings with a lot of the guys who were CEOs in the industry. I said we need about $1 million. That was real money then. It's real money now, but it was real money then. And so I made the presentation, and we went around the room. And Norman, as he would do, he just pointed to people and he'd say, "Are you in or you out? In or out? In or out?" And in that first meeting, everybody but one said they were in. And in the second meeting, it went the same way. And that's how we got to the point where we had enough money to start hiring academics. And because you can see some of these issues coming, I mean, as soon as a minimum wage increase debate is over, the Congress is over, whatever, they're coming back next year and they're going to start over again. And so, our position was, if you see it coming, you don't have to wait for it to get there. You don't have to wait till it walks at your door. So we would hire economists to do studies. And again, major universities, University of Chicago, UCLA, New York University. Those economists think that the minimum wage is a dumb idea in terms of welfare device. And then when the fight started, we already had that study in our back pocket. And that was very different at that point. So a very different situation.
Mr. President.
What happens if we raise the minimum wage?
I see a lot of people losing their jobs.
Really? I don't see it in there.
No, it's right here in the Congressional Budget Office report. It predicts that up to 1 million jobs will be lost if you pass your wage hike.
It doesn't take a fortune teller to know what happens when you raise the minimum wage. Learn more at minimumwage.com.
Remember when I warned you about the healthcare website?
Very different situation.
God bless Norm Brinker for being a catalyst to Employment Policies Institute. Do great work still to this day. We follow them, and I use a lot of their material in our day-to-day work out here. Rick, you've been gracious with your time. We're up at the half-hour mark. You've been called a lot of things. Dr. Evil, of course, as you're most famously known for in the advocacy circles, and then you've been called much worse. But to quote USA Today, they said, whatever you call Berman, he's effective. So thank you for spending this time with us, and hope to have you back soon.
Jot, it's been my pleasure to work with you, buddy.